we're talking kind of high level. I want to hover down a little bit. And I want to specifically, I'm wondering if you can specifically share a little bit about, from your perspective, like what do RevOps people do on a day-to-day basis, right? So consider someone knows nothing about this, right? How would you describe like the day in the life of a RevOps specialist? How do they prioritize what they're doing? How do they decide what projects to work on? What do some of those projects look like? How complex are they? Let's just paint like a picture of what this RevOps specialist would do for a company that it would be an appropriate role on their teams.
Well, I think there's really kind of two different scenarios. So scenario one of I am a RevOps person. It's my job to have all this technology integrated, and you're simply working through the process of getting it all set up, helping to select technology, taking a look at where the data is. Maybe you get a reverse ETL tool to pull the data into HubSpot because you're doing a data warehouse, HubSpot sync. There's a different piece around a RevOps person who's thinking about the setup versus the actual, you're already in the system and you're using it right now.
Right. Well, let's like put the technical piece aside because I feel like that's kind of like maybe. I know you have to keep an eye on that. I know it's not like one and done, but I feel like that's more like, okay, everything's set up. The data's moving around and the reports are firing and the dashboards look good and everyone believes the data. Like, the CRM's feeding the ERP, like everything's kind of set. Let's just assume it's all set up. We can go back to and talk like, how do you make sure that's always working right? But I'm more curious about some of the other stuff we were talking about a couple minutes ago.
So I think the biggest, most important thing is to be able to provide actionable insight based on what the data is telling you in the reports. You're going in there and you're reviewing the data. You're reviewing the marketing reports, the sales reports, the service reports. You're identifying opportunities within the organization. So for example, if you're selling a particular product, you may be looking to see how's this product been trending over the last, call it 180 days versus another product. And you're trying to understand, well, why is one product taking off and another one isn't? So you can go back to marketing or sales and say, hey, listen, I think we have a problem here. I identified it and I'm not quite sure. Or I think I've identified why it's happening. We stopped spending money on these ads. And at the same time, revenue dipped because we're not getting those leads coming in anymore. I think the second part here is data is an ongoing, never-ending battle. And you're constantly cleaning up the system. You're constantly going through and making sure the data is being synced correctly. You're getting the right data in the system. And you're constantly also getting requests from sales, marketing, or service teams about, I need this or I need that, because every organization is a living, breathing entity. So some days you're firemen. You're just going in there and putting out fires because the data isn't set up correctly. The report is broken. The ads are no longer integrated. Other days, you're helping to set up reports for future campaigns. So your job is to just go ahead and say, hey, listen, marketing is launching a webinar. I need to go in there and actually push the buttons to set up the campaign for them and measure all the assets coming in. They also want to be able to have these lists and make sure the data is correct in the system so we can start building lists. So some of it is actually day-to-day fingers to keyboards, helping to provide back-end support. Other times it's building out like a commission report and double checking the data, so you're going in, you build a commission report. Part of the job, I also kind of fall into enablement. I do think a big part of what RevOps does is enablement of both their sales, marketing, and service teams, showing them how to use the tools, how to take advantage of it, new hire training, onboarding for those particular individuals. I think there's a lot of cross-functional collaboration. You're actually in the meetings about how do we increase sales? Or how do we increase sales for a particular product? Or how do we reduce churn? Maybe you say, hey, listen, I got a great idea. Why don't we score everyone who hasn't logged back into our application in 3 weeks, plus is within 2 months of renewal, and start creating a list of everyone we have to retarget with messages or re-engage. So you're also starting to think strategically about how you're going to help affect revenue in the company, and whether it's something that needs to be done from marketing, sales, or service. Also, oftentimes, if you're at an organization with a revenue ops person, RevOps, there's generally a chief revenue officer who's looking at all of this. And just like you had mentioned earlier in your analogy, working, again, Dun & Bradstreet, I think that you said, where the sales op person was kind of the right-hand person of the sales manager. I think in this particular case, your RevOps person is right hand of the chief revenue officer or the person in charge of revenue in the
Mhm.
organization. And they're providing all the insights. So there's a lot of different moving pieces they're working on each and every day, whether it's reporting, insights, participating in those meetings, doing the day-to-day of making sure commission, people are using sequences, checking on user performance. Like, is my sales team even using this CRM?
Yeah.
Like, why is Jimmy over here or Susan not using any of it? Well, it looks apparent that their numbers are, in the toilet. Let's figure out how we can help them. So it's also part of accountability that they're holding the entire organization.
Yeah, let's break down some of those a little bit. Like the one I'm
Sure.
actually most curious about because I'm always kind of surprised. Things tend to break, right?
All the time.
Like all the time, right? Why do you think that is? Because I don't really understand it. Like we set it up, it's working, right? And then all of a sudden, like someone's like, wait a minute, this isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. And you're like, well, it was like 2 weeks ago. Like talk to me a little bit about what do you think happens there? Because I'm constantly like to my RevOps team, I'm like, what do you mean it's broken? Like you fixed it already. Like how did something like this isn't like it's not wear and tear, right? Like your car. Like what is it that like caused this to break when it was working 2 weeks ago?
When it comes to technology, those endpoints may have changed, like you're tapping into. Something with the API, there could be some other change from a technology standpoint just because of the technology we're using. All of a sudden, they push an update and it no longer works.
Right.
I think sometimes it's literal process change. People just start doing their own process. It's inevitable in an organization. Someone's like, let me just start doing it this way because it's easier. You're like, great. I wish you would have told me before we start making all these changes.
Yeah.
Or the best part is when your marketing team or someone else decides to upload a list on their own to HubSpot without informing anyone they're uploading list. Next thing you know, you have 100, 1,000 duplicates in the system,
Right.
and that becomes broken. And so I think yes, technology breaks. It doesn't matter, and oftentimes it's because it's been updated. It's a new feature. What you thought
Yep.
was there is no longer there. You have to rebuild that integration for one another, or that data was uploaded that shouldn't have been, or that report just isn't pulling the right because everyone decides to use a different property field
Right.
to be able to build something out. So stuff always breaks. I wish well, from our perspective, it keeps us in business.
Sure,
Not
sure.
because
But
we
you
wanted
don't want
to,
you
but
you don't
yeah.
want to you want to do productive things, right? You don't want to keep
You
like
don't want to be
fixing
fixed.
stuff.
You don't want to be a fix it
Right.
man. Yeah,
Right.
correct.
But you're right. I mean, you know, someone maybe has too many access credentials and they flick a switch that they shouldn't have flicked and didn't realize it was going to have an impact on this or sometimes we have even issues with silly things like notifications like someone leaves and no one told us, so we didn't go in and add someone else to that notification, so no one was getting notified, right? Like we can only do what we're aware of, so there is a lot of communication and alignment. There is a lot of process that needs to go into supporting these tools so that, oh, someone leaves, you got to tell the RevOps person so they can go in and make sure that those people are off their lists or notifications are updated or what have you. So that's a good point. So uh, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is being able to drive efficiencies in the organization, right? So you mentioned it. We're having a meeting and we're talking about something that's going on in the company. Having someone there that has this systems thinking approach to the tools that they have access to be able to say, "Hey, I think we can support what you're trying to do by doing A, B, and C in the toolkit." Right. So to talk about that a little bit, maybe even give our audience like a couple of good examples.
Yeah, I think of that as process optimization. So you're always organizations are living, breathing entities. They're never going to stay the same. They're always going to evolve. There's always going to be new requirements and needs. So it could be helping to map out the ideal customer journey where you're going through. It could be identifying bottlenecks in that customer journey or maybe better touch points. So let's say you're collecting all these behavioral events and you're struggling to get the customer who signed up for your demo to actually complete the purchase at the end. And right now, the only data you have coming in is they signed up or they completed. but you also know there's 20 steps in between, and you should be hitting them with messages for each of those steps that's unique based upon where they are in that process. And you say, great, how do I get that data into the system? That's part of the RevOps person's job, is to think through that. They may work with a data team. You got to think through it. Okay, once it's in here, how do I build out the workflows that are going to be able to trigger those emails or communication? Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a text message, maybe it's a WhatsApp notification, or even maybe it's an ad that you use audiences for, all the way through the process to increase that conversion. Then your job is to figure out, how do I measure that? Maybe we only had a 40%, but now we got to an 80%, and let's start tweaking it to get it better. I think that's part of it, in terms of just understanding process optimization or identifying bottlenecks. It may be a bottleneck in approving contracts. Maybe it's just really time consuming for how contracts get approved. And you notice when a contract is submitted for approval, it takes up to 48 hours. Well, if someone wants to do business with us, last thing I want to do is take 48 hours. We got to cut that down.
Looking for friction in the sales process and trying to remove it. Yeah. How I'm curious what you think about this. I don't find the RevOps role to be very strategic, but you're kind of painting it in a more strategic way. So I'm agreeing with you. I'm just sharing what I've seen, out in the wilderness. But so like, how frequently do you see the RevOps role in a strategic way, like you're describing, versus more like, hey, build me this dashboard, set up this automation, get me this data, or clean up this data so we can do, A, B, and C next month?
So I think you're describing an administrator versus a RevOps. RevOps is one step above an administrator, in the sense that I don't want to diminish what a RevOps person or administrator does, but you're thinking through strategy. Part of your job is to interpret reports. Part of your job is to say, all right, this workflow doesn't make sense. Well, let's simplify it. Why do we have 45 workflows in here? Can't we just have one workflow that represents all 45? So if it's something, going back to your comment earlier, something may break, and you have to figure out which of the 45 workflows it broke, that's a really time-consuming task. So like, for example, at OBO, we provide a lot of this function. And a lot of it's strategy. It's less fingers to keyboard. It's more meeting with the client and saying, okay, let's do this, this, and this. Listen, they can set up their own email. That's fine. But we can say, well, we have all these property fields, so we can set up dynamic personalization on all these emails. Let's do it. And let's do a test. Non-dynamic personalization with using the custom modules where you're importing a different image associated with that contact, versus standard, everyone gets the same thing. And now the RevOps person can start doing tests around it. Now, we may say, isn't it marketing ops? Yeah, because RevOps takes on some of the responsibility. Marketing ops and sales ops are just doing more than just one individual function. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier, because HubSpot's an all integrated platform, hence the rise of revenue ops, because they're able to work throughout marketing, sales, and service. But I do believe, and in my opinion, a great RevOps person is a strategy person. They are a consultant. They're no different than a management consultant at Deloitte coming in and saying, how do we improve your business? The difference is they're internal. Or you hire a company like either mine or yours to come in and look at it from a strategic standpoint and work with them every month.
That's my next question. Like, how frequently are you in that strategy role with the client versus the technical role, where you're kind of supporting the technical stuff they need done?
So if you asked me that question, like, when we first got started, we're mostly in technical. We were mostly order takers. Hey, what do you need to be able to get set up? We can absolutely be able to get it set up for you. But that's shifted. The role of a company like ourselves, in my opinion, has shifted from being a fingers to keyboards, technical, set this up, take orders, to no, your job is to provide value, business value to the client, help them achieve their quote revenue goals, sales goals, marketing goals. More often now than ever, we're brought in to provide that strategic guidance. And there's certain functions that we're doing ourselves. We're setting up their campaigns, we're helping with ads, but now we're actually going in and helping them think through, how effective is this media? How effective are your campaigns? Okay, I see this here. Let's set up this campaign, because last time you got 100 people for your webinar, only 2 converted. But if we set up this workflow and this type of campaign, we can probably get 15 people converting. So now it's very much more, we're providing much more strategy, and we're using the data we're learning by looking at inside these systems to be able to inform us what that next step should be. And it's an ongoing iterative process. Again, a few years ago, I didn't have access to this data. I couldn't provide this type of valuable intelligence for clients. You're in HubSpot, you don't know how many leads were converting versus weren't. You just saw a
Right.
lead came in via that form that came from some ad, but I didn't necessarily have it all hooked up. Now you
Right.
can.
Right. And then are the clients then going and doing the technical work themselves or asking you to do that also? Because I want to kind of talk about that next.
It's 50-50. Some clients, it honestly, it's easier just to simply outsource it to us and have us do all the work.
Yeah.
Other times it's they got people internally, maybe someone fresh out of school, knowledgeable, but they're just missing all the strategy. Like they know how to put together an email.
Yeah.
They know how to set up a workflow, or we can create a template or a workflow for them, and they can handle kind of the I don't want to necessarily say easier tasks, but more of the consistent tasks that just simply need to get done, blocking and
Yeah.
tackling stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a few clients say to me, look, I don't want to be a HubSpot expert, right? Like I want to be expert in my business. I want to be expert in my salespeople. I want to be expert in the marketing strategy we're executing. I want you to be the HubSpot expert. You go in there, you make it work right. You keep it tuned. You're right. Like recommend areas where we could be better or recommend things we could be doing that align with what we're trying to do from an execution perspective. But you keep the trains running from a HubSpot perspective. And that always kind of resonated with me. Like that seems like that's a good use of our skill set and expertise and let them focus on their business and, what they're trying to do from a, business perspective. It always seemed like smart thinking.